Truth be told, at that time, I had zero background in technology. I mean, I didn't even really know what the cloud was. And again, took a leap of faith, and that was, just a career highlight.
Welcome to TTalks, where we dive into the stories behind the leaders shaping our world. I'm your host, TJ Walliam. Our next guest is an award-winning communications executive with over 25 years of experience, having held leadership roles in some of the most well-known brands, including Microsoft, Target, Canadian Tire, Shoppers Drug Mart, and Tangerine Bank. Recently, she left the corporate world to start her own consulting company, Ignite Communications, where she brings her extensive experience to help organizations and leaders solve complex business and communication challenges. Hi, Lisa. Welcome to TTalks.
Hey, TJ, thanks so much, and thanks for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure, Lisa. Lisa, before we get started, can you give our audience a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in communications about 30 years, aging myself a bit, but I've been about 30 years. Worked for some really great brands, as you noted, and also some really, really smart people. I've learned a ton along the way. From there, I've moved industries. I've joined a couple boards, and as you noted as well, most recently I started my own consulting company, which I'm really excited about. And then outside of work, I have a ton of hobbies that keep me busy and help me balance the whole work-life balance. So everything from golf to squash to running and cooking. And a lot more that I'm sure we're going to discuss.
Awesome. That's quite incredible, Lisa. And it's it's important. You mentioned work-life balance and mental health, and we'll touch on that in our segment a little bit. But before we go into that, I'd love to understand part of this amazing journey and incredible run that you've had. We as individuals typically have pivotal moments that we can go back to and pinpoint and recognize and say, you know what, my career is where it is today, or I am where I am today because of that pivotal moment. If that didn't happen, maybe things would have been different. Do you have something like that you can reflect on or you pinpoint back to?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm pretty lucky. I probably have two or three, but the biggest one, I would say, is the whole reason I'm in communications. So my background is actually not in communications. I have a degree in criminology from U of T, and I was literally heading down that path. I was volunteering as a volunteer probation officer. I ended up moving away from Canada for about a year and a bit. And when I came back, I needed a job just to pay the bills. And I started at Canadian Tire as a temp in an administrative office as part of a corporate affairs team. And, my goal was literally to work there for about 6 months, maybe save some money, and then go off and resume my criminology career. And I met an executive along the way. And I just started watching some of the work he was doing in communications and PR. And I started thinking, this is a pretty cool industry. Lucky for me, he put a lot of faith in me and said, there is a role coming up. Do you have any interest? It might mean, you go back to school a little bit. And at the time, I don't know if they still have it, but Canadian Tire had this work program where you could go back and study in the evenings and they would pay for the cost. And so for me, TJ, that was completely pivotal. I obviously ended up taking him up on this incredible role. I did go back and went to what was then called Ryerson and took my PR and media relations certificate and ended up loving it and staying at Canadian Tire for about 15 years before moving on to other things. So I think that honestly was the most pivotal moment because I would not have been in communications otherwise.
Wow, that is a significant pivotal moment, going from one into a whole other, especially with the advice of someone else, and then having to also go in and apply some learnings, right? You said you went to Ryerson. I was actually at Ryerson as well. I didn't know we were alumni from the same university, but that's quite intriguing and inspiring at the same time. And I guess this will lead me to my next question, which is more on decision making. So at that time, of course, you're younger, you're excited, you've got a lot of energy as well. But what are your tactics for decision making in such cases? Like that's a big decision that you're making from everything you've invested in your time and resources, and we're just going to switch gears just like that.
Yeah, I mean, and the other moment I was going to share is just actually when I got into technology and Microsoft. Truth be told, at that time, I had zero background in technology. I mean, I didn't even really know what the cloud was. And again, took a leap of faith, and that was, just a career highlight for me was working there. And so I think for me, when it comes to decision making, I think first and foremost, I do like to lean on some of my mentors and those that know me the best for their guidance. But ultimately, it really does come down to my gut feeling. And over the years, I've really learned just to lean into maybe the discomfort, right? Get a little bit okay with change, and trust in yourself, and just again go with your gut instinct. I think are probably the biggest things for me. But trying to get more context, get more information, and then invest in learning. I mean, I did have a large learning curve in both of those situations. One, to understand the foundations of communications, and then with technology, I mean, I had a very large learning curve when I moved over to Microsoft as well. So I think the combination of all those things kind of helps me make a decision. But at the end of the day, I really try to trust my gut.
I love that, Lisa, and I think I want to touch on the gut aspect a little bit, because we're on episode 5, and a lot of the leaders I've already talked to for decision making, it comes down to trusting themselves. And I was reflecting on this as well over the past several days and episodes and everything else, that how do we get to the point where we actually have that much trust in our gut or in ourselves? And there's something to be said about the confidence that we have in our own abilities. If there's self-doubt about what we're capable of, I find that a lot of people may not trust themselves the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So is there anything you can highlight or share? Because that's a common theme I'm starting to see, that you might be able to pinpoint and say, what allowed you to build that trust and confidence within yourself?
I mean, I think there's a few things, and I've done a lot of talks with early in career communications professionals who have a bit of, imposter syndrome, or however else you want to describe it. And I think we all have it. It doesn't matter even what stage you're at. I think we all do. But for me, I think, as I said, leaning in and talking to those who are closest to me. I mean, your network will be your biggest supporters. And having their feedback kind of helps increase your confidence. I also think trying things and failing, which I know sounds a bit odd, but trying things and failing and then learning from it and still doing well, going through something that's really tough. So I know a lot of people, have been laid off or gone through restructurings, and I have myself previously. And, the things that you learn through that actually just give you a lot more confidence. So sometimes the more challenging things, the fearful things, are the things that actually give you more confidence. And so I think for me, going through those things, but also tapping into my network and, getting their perspective has also really helped. I mean, again, I think we all still have imposter syndrome, but I like to keep those things in mind. And I like to look back at the things that I went through and where I came out and where I still progressed. Because sometimes that reflexive thinking actually really helps.
Yeah, no, that's really beautifully said. Imposter syndrome is a real thing, and to your point, yeah, we all do have it. We all do experience it. I remember the first time I actually got any awareness of it was at Microsoft, because there was a special guest that had come in who was an Olympian gold medalist, and I don't know if you were around at the time, or if you remember this, but she had basically said that she would actually go into Lake Ontario and she would actually scream at the top of her lungs and cry and just let it out and not realize how she got where she was, but she couldn't show that in front of anyone else because she was a gold medalist. And that's when it really clicked in for me personally. And I've hung on to that for the longest time, is that, what, we have to accept where we are and embrace where we are and appreciate the journey. That's what it's all about. So no, thank you for highlighting that.
I do think, you also brought up a good point. Is I also found hearing from other people that I really admire and respect, who I think would never have imposter syndrome or have, an issue with confidence, and hearing them tell their story about when they did and how they overcame it. I found that hugely valuable. And my very first leader at Microsoft, she was great about sharing, different experiences and different tips that she got from other mentors. And I think it just kind of makes you realize that everybody does go through it. And also gives you some tips on how to combat it when it's you.
Absolutely, we're human at the end of the day, right? So we're all built from the same thing. So that's awesome. I want to shift over to our next question, Lisa. It's really in relation to something I'm very passionate about, have been through my career, and that's work-life balance. It's something that I hit burnout at one point and had to really be deliberate about how to shift out of this. How do you personally manage the demands of your professional and personal lives, especially when you're talking about the different roles you've had, the leadership aspects of it, and then the squash and the sporting aspect that you kind of go into? So I'd love to hear some of your perspectives there.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, I think work-life balance means different things to different people. For me, there are days and weeks where I do work longer and have work longer, and that's been, totally fine because the other things that I've been doing, set me up for success. So I have like a pretty solid morning routine. I've had it for a long time. I like to exercise in the morning. I like to get a good night's sleep typically. But I like to exercise in the morning, go outside, typically if I can for a walk or a run. And then, that just kind of sets me up right for the day. I journal most mornings as well. And so I think for me, having a bit of a routine and a good solid start helps. But I also think just putting your hand up when things are getting, or it feels like it's getting too much. I remember one time someone told me, your manager's not a mind reader, which I thought was great advice for lots of things. And so they don't always know when, your partner or whoever it is, they don't always know when you're suffering and when you need extra help or when you might need an extra day off or you might just need some assistance in whatever it is you're doing. So I think asking for help is really key. And for those people that have good resources in their companies, I think taking advantage of those. For me, it is about a lot of the extracurricular things and the things that I love to do. So I make sure I fit time in for hobbies. I think that really helps. So scheduling a squash game or golf or meeting up with a friend and then being accountable to that person actually make sure that I do it. Because I think it's pretty easy for me. Having a gym date doesn't always work because I can easily cancel on myself, but canceling on someone else makes it, difficult. And then once I get there, I'm so focused on what I'm doing and enjoying myself that it just gives you a bit of a break. So I think moving away from your laptop, being deliberate about having plans, and then just having a solid routine, whatever that looks like, whether it's morning or evening or whatever it is that works for you, I think helps a lot.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the accountability aspect, especially when you're pairing up with someone, because that does hold you accountable to go out and do and be a part of it. And not only are you doing this for yourself, but you're helping someone else do the same thing and achieve that as well. Which takes me into something that's related again, mental health. I can see how you're prioritizing mental health through all of this as well, and disconnecting from the work aspect. Being a leader, how would you recommend to your teams to do this, and how would you help them through this? And to our listeners who are also working with teams, any advice you would have for them to prioritize mental health for themselves and their teams?
Yeah, I do think not assuming that everybody knows where you're at is really helpful, right? Because again, and feeling like you can't put your hand up to say, like, I need help. I feel like, we're not quite there yet, but I feel like we're in a little bit of a different era where people are a lot more understanding and a lot more willing to accommodate than, when I first started in my career. I don't know that I would have shared that early on, but I feel like we're in a bit of a different atmosphere. So again, I think asking for help. As the leader, I do think that you have to realize that different people in your team need different things. So what feels like work-life balance to one person may be different for someone else. And actually having a lot more one-on-one conversations to figure out, where they're at and what those things are that they need, for sure. And then I just think modeling, right? So I think if you're somebody that can actually prioritize your own mental health, if you have a story that you're comfortable sharing, share it. When you go on vacation, actually go on vacation. So I think modeling, and as you know, we talk a lot about that at Microsoft, but I think modeling is actually really key as well, so that people feel safe to take the time that they need. And then I don't know. I think a lot of storytelling that has been going on lately is really helpful. So whether it's someone sharing their own story or a leader talking about someone on their team, so that others can see that they're not being penalized for taking the time that they need.
Yeah, that open communication is key, and I absolutely love that at Microsoft. When during my tenure there, the ability to reach out and whether it's a peer or even a manager and just say, hey, listen, I need some space or I need some help. Absolutely love the culture that was there, and I've heard from many that that's not typical in a lot of organizations, and it's unfortunate because the burden it causes on individual, we we've seen the impacts of it, right? Especially through performance burnout, them
Yeah.
not doing what they're supposed to do, and health issues. Like, there's a lot of things that come out of this. But if we can support these individuals, and if from some of our listeners who are in organizations where this is not fostered, maybe raise up your hand and have that conversation as well, and be that first person to initiate this conversation. Because even at Microsoft, there was a first person who raised their hand and said, hey, this should be a thing, or we should be helping.
Yeah, I don't know if you did this while you were there, TJ, but one of the things that I loved, and it came about during COVID, was the team agreement. I don't know if you worked on that, but it
We
was
did,
where you
yes.
sat down with your team and you talked about like what are your kind of operational, boundaries, if you will. So we talked a lot about like, when do we want to start having meetings? Because we had young moms on the team that had dropped their kids off, and that was stressing them out if they had to start calls at 8 or 8:30 in the morning. So we talked a lot about start time and when do you want to finish at the end of the day and how do we align on that. And outside of hours, especially when you're in PR, sometimes there's issues and so on, but when you had to reach somebody, how did they want to be communicated to so that it wouldn't stress them out? So I really encourage people. That team agreement was phenomenal. And if you talk to most people at Microsoft, they probably have an example that they could share with some of your listeners. But I do think that was a really great way as well to kind of understand where different people are at and to try to set the tone for the team.
Yeah, it was a big eye opener for a lot of us, Lisa, because when we started having those conversations, it really brought to light that everyone was in a different boat. They were in doing their own journeys. They could be individuals who don't have any children to someone who has many children to a single mom, and there were a lot of dynamics that we had to juggle between. And I remember vividly on one of those meetings where one of the individuals called out and said, I'm not a big fan of people sending messages on any communication at 8 or 9 p.m. because it makes me feel like, do I have to also respond
Mm.
or not? So setting those boundaries, because it added that added pressure for that individual who's like, should I be responding or should I not? And the other person who's actually writing or communicating at that time might have a different schedule. And one
Yeah,
of the
true.
executives I've worked with in a keynote or a session that I did on work-life balance and mental health, I love what he does. In his signature, he writes out and says, "My working hours may not be your working hours." Right? So either he's
Mhm.
traveling or he's working late because he took some time off during the day to be somewhere. That communication is clear for the team that you don't have to necessarily respond now, right? It sets them at ease. And that's
Right.
beautiful, right? Because I think more of us need to do that, especially if we're in roles where we're working at odd hours and we don't want to have that perception of is everyone else obligated to respond, especially if you're a leader.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I also think, there are times where you do have to, again, if you're in crisis or issues, from a PR perspective, but I think explaining why you're reaching out and again, not penalizing somebody if they are offline is super important.
Absolutely, absolutely. And crisis is a crisis. Like I've worked as a technical account manager where I'd have my cell phone glued to me
Yeah.
if there's an outage. So I've seen that aspect of it as well, even on weekends. But it's a part of it. But those are one-offs. Those are not
Mhm.
necessarily the norm. But if we make that the norm, then it does have an impact on our own well-being and mental health. So
Yeah, very true. Yeah.
yeah, no, this is great. The next area I want to touch on, and you kind of briefly touched on it earlier, Lisa, is mentorship. Mentorship
Mm.
can be very, very transformative. It can really help people come out of what their shell is and really thrive and perform in many cases. Your experiences with mentors who have significantly impacted your career, for good or bad. I know you've given us that one example, but anything outside of that, I'd love to understand.
Yeah, I know mentors for sure have played a big role. And I would say reverse mentors as well, which I actually discovered again at Microsoft. I did discover the value of reverse mentorship. And so for me, that was pretty important. From a mentorship perspective, I've been lucky. I've had really good mentors most of my career. And I do think a couple of the biggest things were, ask for what you want and what you need. Um, I would say, especially when I was early in career and as a woman, I wouldn't always feel comfortable asking for what I want, or I would assume, of course, they know that I want to be a manager, for example, when I was an IC. Everyone wants to be a manager, don't they? Well, they don't actually all want to be a manager, or they do maybe at different times. And so I would just assume my manager always knew what I wanted, right? Or they must know that I want to work on that special project versus somebody else on the team. And they don't. And so I think that was actually truthfully one of the biggest and best pieces of advice that I received that I also tell other people and tell my team when I'm leading a team, which is you really do need to ask for what you want because not everybody follows the same journey. Obviously, not everybody has the same desires, and so they don't always know. And so I think that's the first thing. And then for me, I do think it is leaning into and having the right mindset when things are challenging and when you go through something like, you know, whether it's as extreme as a layoff or whether it's just a change in your role, or, you know, many of us have gone through change in managers, you know, that weren't our choice. Whatever the situation is, I think having the right mindset, which can be, you know, hard in the beginning part. No one really likes a ton of change, but I think being able to lean in a little bit to the change was some advice I got very early on as well. Sometimes, you know, being uncomfortable will actually lead to your greatest progress in your career. And I think for me, that has been very true.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think for me as well. But I love the you know, the analogy you gave earlier was that your managers are not mind readers, right?
Mhm.
So and they're not. And the same, I apply that that same tactic with my kids as well. And I said, listen, if you need something or want something, don't imagine it, and don't sit there
Yeah.
thinking, hey, you know, dad's going to know or mom's going to know. Have that conversation. Let us know. And if the answer is no, that's okay. At least now you
Yeah.
know, rather
Yeah.
than you
It's
know,
true.
just having it bake in your head and thinking, you know, am I going to get this or am I not?
Yeah.
And now my kids are just open. Dad, can I get this? I'm like, maybe. You know, what do we have to do? What do we have to earn towards it and whatnot? But at least it creates that conversation, right? It gives them that journey that they have to go through to get what it is that they're looking for. And that same thing happens with promotions in your career, right? A
Yeah,
lot of the
for
time,
sure.
like you said, managers don't know what you want. And especially when they're managing multiple individuals and large teams, there's no way they know what they want. You know, it's
Yeah.
if you make it clear and communicate, then you'll find out. Awesome. Well, this is going to now take us into a rapid fire session, which is
Oh, okay.
of the fun section of our show. And so the idea is, I'll ask you a question. The first thing that comes to mind, shoot out the response. You ready?
Okay.
All right. Tea or coffee?
Go tea for sure.
All right. Wake up time.
5:30.
Okay. The most fun brand you've worked with.
Oh, fun. I'd have to say Target.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
And last thing you touch before going to bed.
Oh, I'm so embarrassed to say this, but it's true. It's my phone. I
It's
really hate
most
to admit that, but it's true.
your favorite social media platform for business.
LinkedIn for sure.
One skill every communicator must have.
I think now, focusing on more, and there's a longer answer, I guess, not one word, but the more human centered things. So creativity, being strategic, I think are really key now in our AI world.
Okay. Okay. I like that. Which social platform will be on top in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a hard one. I really don't know. I'm eager to see. I don't know, because I even see the way LinkedIn's shifting a little bit. I don't know. I'll be eager to see, TJ.
Fair
I don't have a
enough.
solid
And my
answer for
last,
that one.
no, it's all good. My last question: if animals could talk, which would you talk to or have a conversation with?
My dog, for sure. I always wonder what the heck my dog's thinking, especially during a dream.
That's awesome. Lisa, thank you very much for being here today. I really, really appreciate your time and sharing your story with our audience today.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you again, Lisa, for sharing your valuable insights and experiences with us today. It's been a true pleasure. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to TTalks for more conversations with the leaders who are shaping our world. Until next time, keep on inspiring.